Okay, I invite everyone to please take a seat. We're going to be getting started soon. All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. Please take a seat and make yourselves feel comfortable. My name is Jessica Perez. I am a senior health science major here at Channel Islands and work as an embedded peer mentor in the Learning Communities program. On behalf of my peers in the program and all the students at Channel Islands, I would like to welcome you to the 18th annual Campus Reading Celebration. The Campus Reading Celebration involves students at every level. They have a voice in suggesting and choosing authors. Money pays for the event, and students host the events. I want to take a moment to reflect on where we are. As many of you know, we currently find ourselves at CSU Channel Islands, a university that was built on unceded Chumash land. It's also a university that was built around the original buildings of what used to be the Camarillo State Hospital, a public psychiatric hospital that ran until the mid-1990s. I think because of the topics addressed in this year's book, it's worth recognizing that there were dozens of women who were forcibly sterilized without their consents within the walls of the hospital. Ultimately, these are different histories that those specifically explored in the pages of Take My Hand. But they also are reminders of the complicated and often silenced histories that have shaped our nation. Now, allow me to share the outline of this evening's proceedings. First, we'll have a welcome remarks from Dr. Kim Voss, who will give a brief history of the Campus Reading Celebration. She will be followed by President Richard Yao, then following an introduction by my colleague Shiona Hewley, we will hear from our guest, Dr. Dolen Perkins-Valdez. Following her address, we will have time for questions from all of you. To facilitate this, we have a microphone set up. We will invite you to form a line for questions. After the Q&A, you will have the opportunity to have your book signed by the author. We would appreciate it if at the time you can form a line to facilitate this process. After questions, we will conclude with a book signing will be here on my left. It is amazing to see so many fellow students here, taking advantage of this chance to be part of a larger community through engagement with books. I would also like to give a warm welcome to those of you from off campus who are following online. I am sure we've connected with this year's book in so many ways. For me, I resonated with Dr. Perkins-Valdez's call for attention to our historic healthcare disparities. As an inspiring healthcare leader, I feel empowered to keep having these critical conversations in order to prevent history from repeating itself. I would like to now introduce Dr. Kim Voss, co-chair of the Campus Reading Celebration Task Force.
Thanks, Jessica. On behalf of the Campus Reading Celebration, welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Kim Voss. I'm Assistant Professor of English and one of the co-chairs of the Campus Reading Celebration. This year marks CI's 20th year, and it's the Campus Reading Celebration's 18th year. This annual signature event on our campus is, to the best of my knowledge, the oldest continuing event on our campus, except for convocation and commencement. In those 18 years, we've had books that spoke to the pressing issues of the day, like Charles Fishman's The Big Thirst and Sophia Noble's Algorithms of Oppression. And books that spoke to the souls of our students, like Roxane Gay's Hunger and Reina Grande's A Dream Called Home. We've had some amazing writers, including the winners of a National Medal of Science, 2 American Book Awards, 4 Guggenheim Fellowships, 4 Pulitzer Prize winners and 2 runners-up, and 4 MacArthur Fellows, the Genius Grants. Not bad for a 20-year-old campus. We don't often make visible the hidden labor that goes into planning an event like this. But this year, we had such a tiny crew that overcame so many obstacles to bring this event to life that I have to. I've been on this committee since 2012, and I've been co-chair since 2017 when I was a lecturer. When I first joined the committee, it was huge. There were staff and at least 20 faculty members from across the university, all planning this event. This year, there were 7 faculty. And 2 of us are going on sabbatical next fall, which leaves 5. And I get it. The last 3 years have taken a toll on everyone. But obviously, a committee of 5 to coordinate an event this large is unsustainable, even for the scrappiest little campus in the CSU. This is also the first year the CRC was chaired solely by assistant professors. So, if this event matters to you, and if you're here, I assume it does, please join us. We could really use the help. So, in the spirit of celebration and to honor the work of this year, these events take an entire year to plan, I'd like to celebrate the women whose collective volunteer labor made this event happen, despite having tons of other things on their plate. So, please give it up for Assistant Professor of Education, Dr. Nichelle Devon. Woo. So poor Nichelle found herself last year at the back of the book signing line, and I was like, ooh, new faculty member, come join us. And she did. Assistant Professor of English, Dr. Stacy I've Got You Anderson. Associate Professor of English and Campus Reading Celebration Co-Chair from 2019 to fall 22, Dr. Georgina Guzman. And 2 of the most tenacious women I know, my 2023 co-chairs, Assistant Professor of History, Dr. Jackie Reneso, and Assistant Professor of History, Dr. Hani Halil. And Assistant Professor of English, Dr. Raquel Baker, who's got so many other things to do, she couldn't be here tonight. And from university events, if you can hear me and have a chair to sit in, thank our event specialist, Carolyn Szymowski. Our staff volunteers from the Division of Student Affairs, Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs, Dr. Doreen Hatcher. And last but most definitely not least, a woman who donates not only her lunches and her weekends to this event, but has also donated her family. You might have seen her daughter Cassie here checking you in at some point. That would be Jeanette Edwards. And let's not forget the workers who set up this event, as well as JB, who's here doing AV with Lunars, and Tortillas, who made the food for us tonight, and the people who helped set up this venue and will clean it up after we all go home. Thank you to all those people. Students, you may have listened to the last couple of minutes of talk about prize winners and workloads and felt like I wasn't talking to you. And I wasn't. I was talking to the people who can help us. But we invite you to join us too. But I'm talking to you now. As you just heard from Jessica, while the School of Arts and Sciences and the Division of Academic Affairs contributed to this event, your instructionally related activities fee paid for 99.6% of it. From the almost 1,400 copies of Take My Hand we distributed, to the author speaking fee, to everything you see here tonight, including the tacos. Your IRA fees pay for a lot of events on campus. So I'd encourage you, when you see that IRA logo or any event or service on campus, to think, that's mine, that's for me. A couple weeks ago, President Yao sent out an email encouraging students to attend events on campus, and I'd really like to add to that encouragement. As one of my student interns, Diana Bautista, said recently, students need encouragement. We need to learn to take up space, to understand that the things on campus are for us, and we should use them. Finally, it may sound corny, but I know I speak for everyone on this committee when I say that you are the reason we do this work. We have witnessed and experienced the transformational effects of meeting a writer, like you'll meet Dolen Perkins-Valdez tonight. As one of my students, Natalie Lopez, said recently, after attending an event on campus, a poet's reading, she said, "It just made me think. I saw this writer and I thought, I could be a writer." It made me think about what's possible. Thank you. And now I'll welcome Jessica back to campus, back to the stage to introduce our president. Come on up.
All right, thank you for sharing the history of this great event, Dr. Voss. I now have the honor to introduce President Richard Yao. Dr. Yao was appointed the 4th president of CSU China Islands in January 2022. Before that, he served as CI's interim president and vice president for student affairs. Identifying as Chinese Filipino American, Dr. Yao is the first person of color to lead the university as president. We extend our thanks to him for continued support of peer mentors on campus and for his recognition of the work we do to transform the lives of fellow students and their families. Please welcome President Yao.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Voss. Jessica, thank you as well for the introduction. And earlier when I was listening to you describe the impact of Take My Hand on you as a health studies major, in your senior year, it's very, very impactful for me, so thank you. And I think that's a perfect way to begin this afternoon's campus reading celebration, a celebration of you, Dolen, thank you for being here, and of your work in making visual the brutality of racism in the history of our nation's healthcare system. Thank you for being the author and educator that you are, and for being on our beautiful campus here today. And stories and legacies take on the lives of their own for good or ill. And in the case of the particular kind of violence suffered by 2 very young Black girls in this story, India and Erica, at the hands of healthcare professionals, Dolen's inspiring character, Sybil Townsend, is instructive for each one of us. She chose herself as a person involved in India's and Erica's lives. So who are we in the face of routine, personal, institutional racism endured by people of color the world over and here at CSU CI? What do we do when we witness the expressions and impacts of everyday sexism, heterosexism, ableism, and religious intolerance, whether in our lives or in the daily news cycle? As strong characters and good stories tend to do, Sybil inspires and challenges us. I did some reflection, and turns out I was 3 years old when the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia decided the case upon which Take My Hand is based, Ralph versus Weinberger, brought by the Southern Poverty Law Center, This was in 1974. The U.S. District Court D ruled that federal funding cannot be used for forced sterilizations and that standards and a process for ensuring informed consent must exist. And this is appropriately a bit destabilizing for me to reflect on the reality that this basic ruling for human decency, dignity, and respect occurred very much during my lifetime. And now here I am, a university president, ultimately responsible for guaranteeing that all research conducted through CSU Channel Islands follows standards and a transparent, reliable process for enduring informed consent. And those of us in academia today take this fundamental assurance of respect for research participants for granted. But I was 2 years old. I was alive when the syphilis study at Tuskegee, which had begun 40 years earlier in 1932, was ended. And during those 40 years, hundreds of black men were, quote unquote, studied without their informed consent, and while they were denied penicillin to treat the disease after it had become the drug of choice for syphilis in 1943. And rather than informed consent, these men agreed to, quote unquote, participate in the study in exchange for, quote, free medical exams, free meals, and burial insurance, end quote. And this legacy lives on. As Jean Heller wrote for the Associated Press in 2017, quote, the chilling effects of the study linger to this day. It's routinely cited as a reason for some African Americans are reluctant to participate in medical research or even to go to the doctor for routine checkups, end quote. And appropriately, and perhaps tragically enough, today is the first day of Black Maternal Health Week, recognized every year from April 11th to the 17th to bring attention to the racial disparities that exist for pregnant women. And according to the CDC, quote, black women are 3 times more likely to die from a pregnancy-related cause than white women due to variation in quality health care, underlying chronic conditions, structural racism, and implicit bias, end quote. It's an old story and a long story history that lives in our present reality. And I know that for most of us here, at least, every one of us who have completed an IRB application, and I was chair of IRB at my old institution, so I'm very familiar with that. The Tuskegee study is known, and many of us here knew before reading Take My Hand about the enforced sterilization of 70,000 or more people in the United States, overwhelmingly poor girls and women of color. But we read, and we continue reading, and then we read some more. And in doing so, we continue to learn new things, challenge our status quo, and refresh our knowledge of what we had learned before as individuals and as the human collective that we are. As much as we're gathered here to celebrate and honor you, Dolen, and as much as we are gathered here for our 18th campus reading celebration taking place in our 20th anniversary year, we must, each of us, understand deeply in a visceral way that we are here to honor and protect something much, much larger. Grace Lynn, a 100-year-old woman whose husband, Robert Nickel, had been killed at the age of 26 during World War II, spoke in late March of this year about the banning of books currently underway in several parts of the country. She said, quote, the freedom to read, which is protected by the First Amendment, is our essential right and duty of our democracy. And even so, it is continually under attack by both the public and private groups who think they hold the truth, end quote. And she went on to say that, quote, banning books and burning books are the same. Both are done for the same reason, fear of knowledge. Fear is not freedom, fear is not liberty, fear is control, end quote. So I want to thank you again, Dolen Perkins-Valdez, for your work. I want to thank all of our faculty members and staff who are leading this task force and this event, co-chairs, Jacqueline Reynoso, Kim Voss, Hani Jalil, Dr. Nichelle Devon, Georgina Guzman, Stacy Anderson, Raquel Baker, Jeanette Edwards, Doreen Hatcher, and of course, Carolyn Shimowski. On behalf of CSU Channel Islands, I want to tell each one of you that we deeply appreciate your hard work and planning to make this event, which is about reading, which is about learning, which is about freedom, makes it all possible. So thank you, everybody. It's now my pleasure to introduce Channel Island student Shay Hewley, who will introduce our author. Thank you, everybody.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you, President Yao and the Campus Reading Celebration Committee for this opportunity to introduce our guests. My name is Shayana Hewley, and I'm a junior political science major and an embedded peer mentor for the Bedford and Dr. Irene Pinkert Learning Community. Dolen Perkins-Valdez is a writer and associate professor at literature and at American University at Washington, D.C., where she teaches creative writing and fiction. With Tennessee roots, Dr. Perkins-Valdez earned a BA at Harvard and a PhD in English at George Washington University. She was a University California President postdoctoral fellow. She is the New York Times bestselling author of Wrench 2010, Bomb 2015, and our reading celebration book, Take My Hand 2022. Take My Hand was awarded 2023 NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Literature Work Fiction, and in 2023 BCALA Award for Fiction. The novel version was named Best of 2022 by Audible. Her debut novel, Wrench, was the finalist for 2 NAACP Image Awards and the Hurston Wright Legacy Award for Fiction. Her fiction essay appeared in Hurston Wright Legacy Award for Fiction. Her fiction and essay appeared in Kenya Review, Story Quarterly, Story South, African American Review, and among other publications. She also written the introductions for edits and memoirs, including Samoan North's 12 Years of Slave, Behind the Scenes of Elizabeth Keckley, a former slave turned seamstress of Mary Todd Lincoln. Dr. Perkins-Valdez work chronicles American history, life, perspectives, often too left out a story. Wrench, Bomb, and Take My Hand explore different times and places: pre-Civil War Ohio, Reconstructed Era Chicago, and the 1970s Alabama, respectively. Take My Hand is particularly resonant for readers at CI, where students, faculty, and staff intersecting identities both enrich our community and challenge by unstructured inequalities at all levels. I personally fell in love with this novel. Sybil's passion for not only her own achievements, but also her community reminds me of my own. Take My Hand highlighted to me the individual value of contributing impacts towards people of all groups. Chair Board of the Penn Folker Foundation, Dr. Perkins-Valdez has visited nearly every public high school in the District of Columbia to talk about the importance of reading and writing. We're privileged to be a part of such conversation here at CI. It is my pleasure to welcome Dolen Perkins-Valdez to the stage.
Okay, is my mic working fine? You can hear me? Okay. Hello, thank you for this invitation. Thank you to the task force. I didn't realize there were only 7 of you. This is a lot of work to put something like this together. So thank you so much for spending the day with me, Jackie and Kim, for just being so welcoming and warm. I appreciate that. Thank you to President Yao for those words. Wow, I was so inspired to hear you speak truth to power. You all are really fortunate to have a president. I don't think I ever heard the president of my college speak so truthfully and forcefully. You know, we talked earlier today about standing in righteousness and how risky it is and how it's not easy. And I admire you, President Yao, for standing in righteousness. it was so interesting at the end of Dr. Voss's remarks today. You mentioned the student saying, well, maybe I can write. And it reminded me when I was little, and I'm just going to start my timer, I thought all writers were dead. And I never met a living writer. I didn't even know it was possible to still be alive and write a book, honestly. And I didn't come from a reading family, you know. The only books I had access to really were the ones at the supermarket, which is where we did go. And so I never made a connection between a writer and a book. So my hope is that just me being here and standing here before you will inspire y'all, because I know y'all have got stories to tell. I know that. There's somebody in here. There are some bodies in here with some stories to tell. And if you don't tell them, who will? So, okay. So I've done a lot of talking today. I'm going to try to do a little bit of reading. This book I began researching in 2016, 2017. And I like to remind people that I started this 3 Supreme Court justices ago. No idea that 2 would pass away and 1 would retire before the book came out. It was an entirely different landscape. But I was curious about these 2 little girls that I had seen in archival footage in documentaries and on YouTube. These 2 little girls who had been sterilized and were being interviewed by these news reporters. And I wanted to know more about the story, and so I just began digging. And it never starts out as a book. It always just starts out with like following my nose and curiosity. And the thing that immediately struck me, my first 2 novels were set in the late 1800s. This was the most contemporary book I've written. The first thing that struck me was how much media coverage there was. I was shocked. It was in every major newspaper. It was in the New York Times. It was in the Chicago Tribune. It was in the Washington Post. The girls were on the nightly news. They were in Time magazine. They were in Ebony. They were in Jet. They had been before a Senate subcommittee hearing led by the late Senator Ted Kennedy, which was partially televised. I couldn't believe it, and I had never heard of it. And I was an Afro-American, we used to call it Afro-American. I know now you're Africana, Black Studies, but back then we called it Afro. I was an Afro-American Studies major in college and had never been taught this history. I began to think that it had been willfully swept under the rug, and I wanted to tell the story. Then I thought, well, has somebody written the book? Nobody had written the book. They say the most genius things are the simplest. We go looking for something complicated when it's right there in front of us. So I felt like, well, maybe I'll just write this book. And that's when I began to dig. I was reading newspaper articles, and finally I reached out to Joe Levin, the actual lawyer who argued the case, and he's still alive, one of the co-founders of the Southern Poverty Law Center. And he welcomed me down to Montgomery, and when I got down there, I went to the Southern Poverty Law Center. He's retired now. But we were supposed to meet there, and there's a lot of security because they get a lot of threats, and so you go through all the security. And they led me to this empty office where I was to wait for him, and I saw these boxes in the corner. I thought, you know, empty offices sometimes have boxes. I didn't think anything of it. And then Joe arrived, and we began talking, and he said, you know, these are the case files. They've been in storage for 45 years, and I haven't gotten them out in 45 years. He said, and when you called me, I wanted to refresh my memory, and I brought some of them for you to look at. And I said, what? Those are the case files? What? You know, I started my mind was going. And he said, and I've also arranged for you to use this office while you're here. And I said, what? You know, usually I'm in the hotel with the bad lighting. And I said, okay. And so for 3 days, I went through files and would talk to him. And then on my last day, he said, have you spoken to Mrs. Bly, Jessie Bly? And I said, the social worker for the girls? And he said, yes. And I said, she's still alive? And he said, yes. And I said, do you have her number? And he said, no, he didn't, because he hadn't spoken to her in years. And I immediately began Google stalking her. And I called her. You know, I can find anybody on Google, just like y'all young people. I'm good at this. And I found her home number, not her cell phone, and I called her, and I introduced myself. I said, you know, I'm a writer, I'm a professor. You know, I have to drop the university affiliation when I'm making these cold calls. I'm a professor at American University, and she's like, And she was a little skeptical, I could tell. And I said, I'd like to take you to dinner tonight. And she said, And I said, can I come pick you up? I said, I've got university funding. I'll take you anywhere you want to go. And she agreed, and she gave me her address. And when I got to her house, her family was there to, you know, all the family was there to meet me. And one of her church members was there to accompany us, I guess in case I tried any funny business. And we come out of the door, and I had a big white rental car in the driveway. And I said, do you want me to drive or you drive? She says, oh, no, honey, you're driving. And I said, oh, okay. And I've got my 2 senior citizens. I said, where are we going? I said, we can go anywhere in town. And she said, we want to go to Red Lobster. And I said, okay, I'll take you anywhere. Red Lobster. So I said, okay, and we got in the car, and it was far. It was like 30 minutes. And they were so happy that we were going to Red Lobster, and I was thinking like cheddar biscuits, yay. And we got there, and we had a lovely dinner, and she and I just talked, and she was still in touch with the Ralph sisters. And I couldn't believe it. And so when I got back to DC, y'all, I was on fire. Even though I had been doing this research and been writing these bad pages for about a year, when I got back, I knew what I was going to write, and I started over. And that was in November of 2017. So I'm going to read this part. I'm going to read a couple parts. I'll read and then talk a little bit and then read. This is when Civil first meets the girls. So in my book, Civil is a nurse. She's recently graduated from nursing school. She's 23 years old, and she starts working at this federally funded family planning clinic called the Montgomery Family Planning Clinic, or as I call it, a government clinic. And the nurses are also assigned home visits. So this is her first home visit out in the country to meet the Williams family. When I drove up, at first I assumed that the Williams sisters lived in the neat brick Rambler with the 2 pickup trucks parked out front. A thick cloud of dust swirled around my mama's little car, and when it cleared, I spied 2 little white boys standing on the house porch. I rolled my window all the way down, hoping they'd see my uniform. I'm looking for the Williams family. I was positive I had read the number on the mailbox correctly. One of them pointed behind the house, and I understood. I wound the car around the pickups, following the skin outline of tire tracks. The Pinto pushed through the ruts, bouncing so hard I was afraid I'd hit my head on the roof. I prayed I wouldn't get stuck. The last thing I wanted was to have to walk back down to that house and ask those boys to go get their daddy. Fortunately, it hadn't rained in a while and the ground was dry. The trees cleared and the land swelled up into a hill. At the top sat a cabin. The car sputtered, but I tapped the gas pedal and somehow made it to the top. Everything leveled out and the tire tracks disappeared into brush. Off to my left, I could see a wide field of green stalks. I didn't know a thing about farming, but anybody with eyes could tell that was wheat growing out there. Cows grazed in a lot beside the barn. A lone chicken peeked at me as it stepped through knee-high grass. Up close, the structure was more of a wooden shanty than a cabin, and it looked tired, as though a wind had blown it askew and it hadn't had the energy to right itself. A skinny black dog scratched its back in the dirt. I got out of the car and stepped into a huddle of gnats. The air smelled of burning wood. Something told me these girls couldn't be in school. If they were, they didn't go every day. They should have been expecting me, but they didn't have a phone, and I wasn't confident they even knew about our appointment. They had initially been assigned another nurse who had quit the clinic the month before. I was there to pick up where she left off. A girl wearing grubby pants and an orange t-shirt shaded her eyes with a hand. The backlight of the sun darkened her face. How you doing? I'm Sybil Townsend from the Family Planning Clinic. It didn't make sense for us to be out here in our uniforms, but Miss Seeger insisted. It was March chilly, and I had left my sweater in the car. I stepped up closer. Someone had tried to braid the girl's hair, but the roots were so matted with dirt that only the ends of the hair could be plaited. I clutched the file under my arm and tried to remember what I'd read. "Are you India?" The dog rubbed against my leg, and I fought an urge to push the animal off. It sidled away. I looked down, and sure enough, it had left a brown mark on my white pantyhose. "She don't talk." I jumped. I hadn't seen the other girl standing inside the screen door. I remembered the contents of the file. The younger sister was mute. I had skimmed that detail, but it came back to me now. "Oh, okay, I'm Sybil Townsend. I'm the nurse sent to give y'all shots today." "What happened to the other one?" "I don't know," I stuttered. The nurse's leave taken baffled me too. Maybe the demands of the job had been too much. Maybe she'd found something that paid more. Being out here on this farm wasn't anybody's idea of a good time. Even so, there weren't government jobs just laying around waiting to be picked up. "Is your daddy home?" "No, ma'am." I blinked as I pieced together their story in my head. Mace Williams, father, 33, milked cows, tilled the land, did whatever the white man told him to do in exchange for this shanty and a pittance of money. Constance Williams, mother, deceased. Patricia Williams, grandmother, 62. In the distance, the inky outline of grazing cows flickered in the light. "Your grandmama here?" "Grandma, the nurse here." I tried to smile, but I wasn't sure if my expression passed for polite. I didn't know whether I should ask to come inside or if I should wait for the grandmother to come out. The older sister settled it. I remembered now that her name was Erica. "You can come in if you want." She opened the door for me. The screen pulled away from the edge of the wooden frame, not much protection against the flies. It creaked on its hinges. I'm not sure if I said this before, but walking into that house changed my life. And yes, changed theirs too. I walked right up in there with my file and bag of medicine ready to save somebody. Little old me, 5'5" a know-it-all. So this is, my interpretation of what that home visit might have been like. I did find in my research, the media coverage was just vast. And so I did find pictures of the family in that cabin where they lived. It was actually Mrs. Bly, the social worker, who got them out of that cabin and into public housing, not the nurse, as it happens in my book. And so I just tried to capture what that would have been like, the whole family living in a one-room cabin. And also, what we learned, and this is chapter 2, this is not, spoiling it for anybody, but we learn that those girls are already experiencing side effects. She does give them a Depo-Provera shot during that visit, and they're already experiencing side effects from the drug that nobody has talked to them about and which they don't understand. So I basically try to show that they are struggling to hold their dignity, but they're somehow surviving, but they are, really struggling, and that's why Sybil in the book is motivated to get them out of that cabin. The next part I want to read is after the girls are sterilized. I had said earlier today that I would tell y'all my original title for the book, anybody that came back today. My original title for the book, which nobody liked, I told you I'm bad at naming things. My agent didn't like it, my editor didn't like it, nobody liked it but me. I still like it, so I'm telling you. It was called The Takings. And I named it after the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution, which is often referred to as the Takings Clause. And that clause is typically used to justify reparations. It's a It's a amendment that says that no property shall be taken for public use without just compensation. I'm paraphrasing here, right? And so the reparations lawyers and congressional theorists or constitutional legal theorists suggest that bodies were taken for public use without just compensation, and this should be rectified. And so I mentioned earlier that while 9 states have issued formal apologies for what those states did at the state level to forcibly sterilize women, only 3 have established compensation funds, California being one of the 3, and the other 2, Virginia and North Carolina. And so, in my mind, this is sort of what should happen, right? Women who were sterilized without their consent by the government should be compensated in some form. And it wasn't a lot of money. I think in California they might have gotten, and they said there's some women that never, like some of the funds are still there because nobody ever stepped forward to claim them. I think it was like $25,000. I mean, there is no number you can put on this. It's really a symbolic gesture. But still, right, it matters. It's part of the acknowledgement that we talked about earlier. So this scene that I'm going to read now is an echo from my original title that everybody hated and they took from me. I'm just kidding. Actually, I'm not very good at titling things, so I didn't fight for it. I did not fight for it. But there is an echo in the book, and this is, so after the girls have been sterilized, Sybil goes by to see Mrs. Williams. The family is, as you can imagine, upset. With her, with everything. They feel betrayed. So, I'm going to read this little section. Okay. Actually, I've never read this section. I've been wanting to read it, and then for whatever reason, I run out of time. So I'm going to read this little. It's short. Okay. I knocked on the door. I had not seen any of them since the day I'd found out about the surgery, and I knew it was presumptuous of me to stop by unannounced. Someone yelled, "Come on in." Okay, by the way, they're in the new apartment now. They're not in the cabin anymore. But when I entered, the living room was empty. I walked straight to the girls' bedroom. Erica lay on the bed peeling an orange, the ripped skin scattered across a napkin. "How you feeling?" She nodded, and I hoped that was a fine. "Y'all need anything?" Erica handed over half her orange to her sister. India sat back on the bed, pillows propped behind her back. Both girls wore pajamas. "They had ice cream in the hospital," Erica said without looking up at me. I didn't know what to say. I couldn't tell if it was a real request for ice cream or a statement to get rid of me. I didn't have my car with me, but there was a corner market within walking distance. I found Miss Williams sitting in her chair in the living room with a crochet hook in her hand. "Y'all got any ice cream?" I asked her. I'm surprised I remember how to do this. I haven't picked up a crochet hook in years. "Nice color," I said, pointing to the ball of pink yarn unraveling on the floor around her feet. "They give it to us over at the senior center." I picked up the yarn, made a loop, and the next thing I know, I'm making up a granny square. My mama taught me. Her name was Ella May. She used to make these big old blankets we would lay across the foot of the bed. They was the most beautiful thing you ever seen, and when you slept under them, they smelled like the peppermint oil she rubbed on her hands. She was talented with the needle, yes, sir. Could sew anything you set your eyes on. But what she really liked was the slip of yarn between her fingers. She never said as much, but you could tell. She could do it with her eyes closed. The veins of her hands flexed as she moved the hook over and under the yarn. I moved to the end of the couch so I could better see. "For as long as I can remember," she said, "the women in my family have made the best life they knew how. I bet when you first come out to that house on old man Adair's place, you thought I was a nasty woman." "No, I never thought that," I said. "You thought something. I saw it on your face. You looked around that house like it wasn't fit for a mule. And you know what? You was right. You ain't never lived in a one-room house with a dirt floor, nasty dogs, and the white man walking all up in there in his work boots without so much as a knock. That house wasn't never mine, just a way station where we was stopping on our way to someplace else. Only the train never come, and so we was left sitting there on that platform, waiting. She wrapped the loose yarn around an index finger. You ain't interested in the ramblings of an old woman like me. I guess I just wanted to say to you that when you got us this apartment, I felt something like hope. Something I ain't felt in a long time. You know, I married Ernest T. Williams when I was 18 years old, and my husband promised me a better life. Every month he brung home his money and put it in my hand. He would say, "Don't you ever get no ideas about me out here in these streets. You the only woman ever hugged this neck." But then he died and left me. Just out of the blue, he had the nerve to go and die on me. Just like Mace's wife died on him. Second time death knocked on my door, near about destroyed me. I told the Lord to just go ahead and send for me. She stopped to wipe her nose with a tissue, then picked her needle back up. "So you come along and get us this here apartment, and the first night I slept in that bed in that back room, I dreamed my Ernest was still alive. We was living here together. Me, him, Mace, the girls. Then somebody come and take it all away. Faceless people, like ghosts, but not ghosts. When I tried to stop them, they shouted words at us, and I woke up scared. Every night since, I've been expecting a knock at the door. Nobody's coming to take anything away from you, Miss Williams," I said. "No, that's where you're wrong," she said. "They can always take it away. It ain't yours, Miss Civil, none of this." She waved a hand at the air, dropping the yarn. "Don't you know that? Ain't nobody ever taught you what they can take? They just take, take, take." The room dimmed as if somebody had turned off a lamp. It became so quiet I could hear the wind surging. I thought vaguely of the ice cream the girls had requested. I thought of other things I could buy, things I could gift, a radio, clothes, shoes, a toaster for the kitchen. She spoke her next words in a whisper. "I know you thought less of me living out there in that shack, and I didn't think so much of you neither, to tell the truth. And now, please," I wanted to say, "give it to me. I hadn't known I needed her forgiveness, but my heart longed for it. Now, I know the world exactly what I thought it was," she said, and cast her eyes downward. So this is one of, people ask me about the hard scenes. This one was a sort of hard scene for me to write because it is, Mrs. Williams really at her lowest after what happens to the girls. And I wanted to capture that because I wanted to capture the deep sense of betrayal of the family. But I don't want to end on that. I want to end on what I was talking about earlier, where I talked about, this is a story about survivors and not, victims, right? And so these sisters, the Williams sisters in my book and in real life, the Ralph sisters, they survived this. They're still alive and they survived it. And that's what I love about some of these stories, is that they're stories of survival. Okay, here we go. Ooh. One second. These are all new parts I haven't read before, so it's fun to read new stuff. All right. Well, that one's kind of short, but give me 1 second. By the time of the verdict, they looked like the other kids in their schools, having lost the telltale signs of kids in deep poverty. Erica had dark freckles on her forehead and sneezed a lot in springtime. She loved to wear lip gloss and dance to soul music. Whenever she visited my house, she went straight for the records. I was a Stax girl, Carla and Rufus Thomas mainly, with some occasional James Carr thrown in. But Erica gravitated toward the smoother Motown sounds. She was captivated by the lyrics of Stevie Wonder and had listened to Music of My Mind so much that I told her she was wearing a hole in the record. The fungus on India's neck finally cleared. She had a mole in the crook of her nose, and her favorite food was peanut butter. She ate it straight from the jar. And the girl had never met a dog she didn't like. She would feed the strays wandering around Dixie Court pieces of stale sandwich bread, a day-old biscuit, crackers. I remember this white German shepherd that followed her everywhere. When India mounted the swing, the dog would sit nearby and watch her, as if to make sure she didn't fall. India didn't have language to give the dog a name, but she could whistle. It wasn't a loud whistle, but the dog could somehow hear it and would come crawling out from underneath one of the buildings. It took me a while to realize that those mangy dogs on the farm had been tolerated by the family because they soothed India. After moving to Dixie Court, Miss Williams swore to never allow a dog in the house again. But India cared for this shepherd outside, drawing comfort when the dog lay at her feet as she scratched his back. Her other passion was dolls. She owned 6 of them and propped them against the pillow on her bed. Erica, left-handed, stubborn, polite, made her bed every day, slept in her socks, lover of chocolate ice cream, Motown music, and her little sister. India, right-handed, tender, dog lover, mother of dolls, peanut butter addict, climber of fences, rider of carousels. Their names always had the ring of twins to me, Erica and India, India and Erica. Though very different, there was no mistaking it. The sisters were soulfully connected. The Williams sisters, 2 of the greatest loves of my life and 2 of my greatest heartbreaks. They are both the reason. Okay, that's a little, I'm not going to tell that. That's a little bit of a spoiler. They are the reason I found it in my heart to love and mother you. I never had confidence in my ability to mother, but my love for them has endured over the years. So I'll end there for Q&A. I guess somebody wants to come to the mic. As you make your way to the mic, I'll tell you that I recently met the Ralph. I did not interview the Ralph sisters for the book, but I recently met them for the first time. I was in Montgomery. The mayor honored them, and the city council. And they're in their late 60s. They lived together up until late last year. They were still living in public housing. And this journalist, this New York Times journalist, I mentioned this, wrote a story about them that was on the cover of the New York Times Magazine. You can find it online. It came out last June. And a woman from Seattle called the New York Times and said, I read the story of the Ralph sisters. She said, my husband's in tech and has done well for himself financially, and I want to give the sisters some money, real money, right? And in concert with this benefactor, who I guess still remains anonymous because her name has never been publicly announced, and in a community organization and the New York Times, the sisters got their first house. And they are so excited. I mean, it's not a grand house, but it's their house. And when I asked the older sister, Minnie, I said, what's your favorite thing about your new house? She said, we have our own bathrooms. I guess they had to share a bathroom. And I thought, are there any sisters in the history of the universe that want to share a bathroom? I don't know any. So they were really excited about having 2 bathrooms.
Thank you so much, Dolen, for your wonderful presentation. I wanted to ask, You've written so many wonderful, acclaimed books. How do you decide what subject matter to take on and which stories to tell?
Ooh, that's a good question. You know, the story has to really, because books take a long time, and, you know, Instagram calls. You know, like I can just like wander off into social media. So it has to be something that I cannot stop thinking about. Somebody asked me, I was recently being interviewed, and somebody asked me, do you have any book ideas for the aspiring writer? And I was like, oh, there's so many book ideas. Like people call me with book ideas all the time, and someone just called me about this orphan's home that existed from like the 1920s that housed over 300 children in Virginia, and then the house burned down and the history was lost. And I thought, that's a novel, you know? So there's lots of novels out there, for sure. You know, go somewhere and you see a little historical marker, go out there and read what that marker says, and maybe it's something you need to write about. But for me, it has to just grab me and speak to me.
Is India still mute, or did she gain language? And also, have you started on the next novel?
Okay, thank you. So in real life, the younger sister is Mary Alice, and she was born nonverbal. She is nonverbal. And she also was born without a hand. So she has a physical disability as well as an intellectual disability. And that's part of the reason why she lives with the older sister who takes care of her. There were actually 6 Ralph children. There were 3 brothers and 3 girls. The oldest sister was Katie Ralph. She was 16 years old, and the only reason she was not sterilized is because she hid under the bed when the nurses showed up. She knew something was wrong, and she hid under the bed. But Katie is still alive too. But it's interesting because when you talk to Mary Alice, you can tell she understands everything you're saying. And so, you know, when she talks, she nods or she shakes. You can communicate with her. And the sisters really are, you know, I had not met the sisters before I wrote this book, and I think some of this was just channeled to me through the spirits. But, you know, we were at an outdoor concert, and the younger sister got bitten by a mosquito, and Minnie was scratching her back where the mosquito had bitten her. So they're very loving and close. And, have I started on the next book? Yes, it's set in North Carolina, and it's probably not coming out until 2025 because I'm slow.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm curious about the process. You said, how much did the conversation with the social worker change the trajectory of your book? Because you said that after that conversation,
Yes.
you came back and just throw everything out and then
Yes.
restart.
After that conversation and after going through the case files, because you didn't have that, you can't find case files unless somebody gives you access, right? And also talking to Joe Levin, who argued this case at 30 years old. Right? Here's the thing. People ask me, was this the biggest case that Joe Levin argued? Let me tell you. I mean, the man is inspiring. The case he argued before this, which he won, he was in his 20s now, was on behalf of female military officers against the U.S. military because the officers were supposed to get housing and basic things for their families, right? And the male officers would get the housing, and this female officer had a family, and they were not giving her the housing and the other things they were giving the other officers. And Joe Levin argued that case successfully. And many others, right? And I mentioned briefly in the book, he's about to argue a case on behalf to make women, to allow women to become state troopers in Alabama. That was also a Joe Levin case. And he's so humble about it. He won't tell you. You know, you have to Google him. And you say, did you do this? And he's like, oh, yes. And you're like, you're 28. This is crazy. I need to do more with my life. So it was talking to him. It was looking at the case files. It was talking to Jesse Bly. And then it was looking in one of the newspaper articles, because the original lawsuit was filed in Alabama court against the clinic, naming the head nurse. That was before Joe Levin found out this was happening all over the country. He heard from this guy, he's still alive, he lives in Colorado, his name is Dr. Walter Hearn, you can look him up, who told him about here in California, there were thousands of women being sterilized who were calling him. And so I was curious about this newspaper article that I saw. where the head nurse defended herself by saying, well, it must have been okay to sterilize the girls because all 8 nurses who worked at the clinic were black. And I said, what? I couldn't believe I had read that. And I couldn't find those women. And so that was when I said, Joe can speak for himself, Mrs. Bly can speak for herself, but I need to figure out these nurses. And so I just cobbled together different things that people had told me. And when I went back, I knew I had a nurse. That changed the book. It always takes me a year to even figure out what I'm doing. I don't know how people write a book in a year. People come up to me and they say, well, I have a manuscript. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm slow, though. I know there are other people who are faster.
Hi.
Hello.
So we talked a little bit about, in the beginning, how there's starting to be this new wave in the country of different administrations trying to ban books that speak truth to power. Mm-hmm. And of course, your book touches on very important subjects concerning U.S. history and the treatment of people of color. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what we can do as educators, as citizens, against these narratives against these kinds of books.
Yeah. I have not gotten on the radar of the book banners yet, so we'll see about that. This is what I will say, and this is just my personal opinion. I mean, I'm not speaking with any kind of authority here other than just personally. As a mother of a 16-year-old, as a person who has taught in academia for 20 years now, and as a person who has been around y'all young people enough to know that y'all can teach us something. This is what I will say about that. If they think they're going to keep information from these kids, in what universe are you going to keep information from young people who have the internet? It's powerful. My daddy used to hate it because every time we'd argue, I'd Google it. And he would be like, don't always Google it. I'm like, why? This is just information, Daddy. This is just information. So if you think you're going to keep information, I just think it's futile. That's what I think. I think you want to talk about virtue signaling, right? You want to talk about empty virtue signaling. That's what it is. To me, it's an empty symbolic gesture of something. That's not to say that there aren't going to be kids who come up who have no clue because they didn't teach. That's not to say that. Because, our kids spend most of their day at school, right? They have them a long time. But I think once they become of a certain age where they either have a cell phone or they have access to a computer or they're in the library or they're talking to their friends, you cannot keep information from them. You cannot hide trans people from them, right? We're here. Our people are here. It's futile. So honestly, I don't worry about it too much. I just think okay, all right then. Have you met a teenager? Really? They get my kid gets the news. I always tell people, don't argue with her because her information is often accurate. I don't know how, but it's often accurate. And I don't sleep on these young people. They teach me, or they tell me something in class, I don't argue with them. I'm not the authority because sometimes they're right. I mean, I'm not going to say sometimes. I'm going to say a lot of times they're right. It's a conversation, and I don't understand what that book banning thing is all about. Books? They don't even go to the library. I mean, we're at the library now, but you know what I'm saying. It's really? Do you really think that's going to do something? That's how I feel. I'm not too worried. I got faith in y'all.
I know personally there are subjects that I am definitely obsessed with researching.
Yeah.
And so I wondered what made you very obsessed with this particular topic and these two sisters and their experience and how it really reflects what a lot of people experienced. I forget the number you said of people who were sterilized.
Well, that's the thing. We're still working on those numbers, right? Like I said, there's a compensation fund in California, and some of the women haven't even come forward to claim it because we have been silenced and we have been shamed. So we're still, the New York Times journalist that wrote that article, I just saw her last week. We did an event together, and she said, somebody was asking me about the number. I said, the number is hard to pin down. What makes me obsessed? I would say outrage. You know how, I don't know if you've read the book yet, but like Sybil is like a do-gooder. I'm a do-gooder. I know some of y'all are, like, I'm just like driven by trying to do something good in the world. It's why I do this. I'm driven by something that I think is like really important, right? I think this is important. And I think it's so connected to so many different facets of our life. This is not just a story about forced sterilization, right? This is a story about just trying to do something right. Okay, I'll give you an example that maybe some of the professors here can relate to. So when I first started teaching, I had a teaching mentor, and she gave me like some books to read. And one of the books, I don't remember what book it was talking about unintentionally harming students. It was saying, if you unintentionally say something that does harm to a student, good intentions are not an excuse. And boy, there was something about, I had to go back and think about that. And I thought about that. I was really scared about that in my early years of teaching, that I was going to be meaning well and I was going to unintentionally say something that was going to harm a student. So I carry my responsibility in the classroom very seriously, right? I'm very attuned. When we have those trainings about like making sure that you don't like offend, I'm a Black woman, but I can offend. I'm not like above offending someone, it happens. And so I'm very attuned to it. I had a student a few years ago who was visually impaired, who came to me and said that one of my readings was ableist. It was Raymond Carver's Cathedral. I don't know if anybody's ever read that short story. And I was like, what do you mean? And and she told me, and every single time anything ableist happened on that syllabus or in my classroom, she was in my office. Every single time. She did not let me rest. Every time I saw her coming, I knew I was about to be corrected. And when she graduated, I recommended her for graduation speaker, and she got it, and she was just amazing. And I don't think I'm ever going to forget her. I just don't. She changed me. And it wasn't even her duty to do that. I was supposed to be teaching her. She shouldn't have to come to college and educate her professor. That's not right. And I feel like for her to do that was so generous. And, I never would have asked her to do that. In fact, when she came, when I saw her coming, I always had to brace myself because I knew I was about to be corrected, and sometimes forcefully, And so I carry my responsibility in the classroom very, very seriously, and I listen. And she did it to another professor who didn't handle it in the same way I did and came to me, and I said, everything in the classroom, people see through their own lens, no pun intended, right? And so we have to respect that. So be checked. It's okay to be checked sometimes, but it shouldn't be all the time. And it should be something that we continuously educate ourselves about. And that is Civil. Civil is checked by this situation. She is learning that good intentions are not enough, right? That you can still do harm. And in this case, it was irreparable harm. Hopefully when we do harm in other situations, it's not irreparable, right? But like honoring your students' pronouns. If you don't do that, that's harmful, right? We just have to, even when you slip, it's harmful. If you don't think you can remember, give yourself a Post-it note. Don't do these things. Don't, and really, we call them microaggressions. And just because you don't think you're being aggressive, it is. Especially when it happens more than once. So, I think about this a lot in my own life, and I carry my responsibility in the classroom very seriously. I carry it very seriously even as a parent, how I parent. quick to apologize to my children and quick to say I was wrong. I think those things are important. Oh.
So I was curious, what part of your plot changed after you read the case study and met with the social worker? Like, what parts had you already, because you said you had started over, what bits did you change exactly?
Ooh, I don't even remember what that original thing was about. I mean, I had some kind of bad draft. I just know that, like, in those early days, you don't know what you're doing. So I can't remember what I was writing before I met with them. It was just bad pages that I threw out, early pages. I think in the early pages, Sybil had a brother who had died. It was a whole bunch of stuff that just that couldn't, she needed to be an only child. Like, that became clearer to me. Yeah, I can't remember. But I will say that, like, at some point, if you spend enough time with a manuscript as a writer, things become blazingly clear. But you have to be ready to throw some pages out. And some people aren't willing to throw their pages away, so they just keep trying to improve on the bad pages. But I'm always willing to throw some pages out. Always. And I'm a ruthless editor of myself. Like, even towards the very end, I'm cutting until I have a very lean manuscript. I mean, that's what I want. I want real lean pages. Every writer has a different, that's me, right? Like, another friend of mine, he says he wants his prose to sing. And his prose does sing. It's very beautiful and musical. And that's what he's going for. He's going for, like, language that has cadence and, rhythm and that kind of thing. I'm going for lean prose. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Thank you all for coming. We're going to be shifting into the book signing portion. And that's going to be just on that side of the plaza. Also, we have a lot of food left over, so if anyone wants to take food on their way out, that would be great.
Thank you.